I'm going to open up a little bit for a conversation with my colleagues here and then to all of you. I thought I might kick off the conversation by sharing two shocking news stories of the last week or so. At least I thought they were quite shocking. One very small and one very big. The small one took place on the M5, where there was a traffic jam, a terrible traffic jam on the M5. And you can picture all the people fuming in their cars, getting more and more angry with each other, with the system, probably with the weather. And one of the cars contained a quartet who got out of their cars and went, I believe, onto the sort of central reservation of the motorway and started playing. Pachelbel, I think, and Bach. And this sort of sudden random act of spontaneous kindness clearly completely transformed the days not only of the people who were there, but then, of course, it was recorded on people's phones and went viral as a tiny little sort of act of inspiration. That was the small example, and it's kind of shocking because these things are in some ways a bit rare. The big example was Germany. All of you will have seen the news in the last 2 weeks as the nation of Germany, from the very highest levels of the Chancellor down to the smallest town, has opened its arms to the flood of refugees from the Middle East and shown an extraordinary level of generosity and compassion, which I think I've always never seen before across an entire nation. Really probably changing many people's views about what kind of a country Germany is. Now, they're both examples of action. They're both examples of action and not just of the kind of mindfulness which doesn't have care and compassion in it. But what I want to ask all of my speakers here is about difficultness. Because you all make it sound so easy. But actually, all the things we're talking about today are really very hard in practice. And I'll maybe start with you, Richard. You made the plasticity of the mind and the habits, again, sound like they're straightforward methods all of us can adopt without really any problem. We just need to read the guidebooks, read a bit of the science, and bingo, we're there. Why is this so difficult?
Well, it's a very important question. His Holiness, I think, clearly made a sobering comment in describing how long it takes to actually change the mind. It's not something that we should naively believe can change instantaneously, particularly for an adult who has been acting in a certain way for most of his entire life. It's kind of like changing the course of a river that's been flowing in the same direction for decades. It does take work, and it is not easy. And I think it's important to not misrepresent it in that way. On the other hand, I think it's very clear from the kind of research that we and other scientists have done that if you begin very, very modestly in a way that maximizes the likelihood of success, and in my view, what would maximize the likelihood of success is by biting off very small chunks that are very realistic for people to do. So it's unrealistic to ask a person, for example, to practice for an hour a day. Most people will not do that. But if you say, try this for 1 or 2 minutes and sprinkle it a few times throughout the day, that's something that's much more doable. And one of the things that we see, particularly with children, is once children taste the quality of calming their mind and opening their heart, it is a quality which is infectious. And they can directly taste it, and once they've directly tasted it, it becomes more familiar, and then they are interested in coming back to it. We do some very simple things with children, and starting with preschool children in the US in public school settings that are very low-income settings. This is not white middle-class America. These are tough schools where 70% of the families qualify for free lunch. And we're going in with very simple programs where kids for example, do an exercise where they're simply listening to the sound of a bell that we ring, and they're instructed to simply listen very closely, and as soon as you can no longer hear the sound of the bell, raise your hand. Very simple exercise to cultivate attention. And it's really remarkable. You can do that in a classroom with 20 kids, 4 and 5 years of age, and it's perfectly still for that 10 or 15 seconds. And that's all it takes to invite a person to provide a taste of what this kind of calm, clear, warm-hearted exercise is. And I think that we can then build from that. And so it's true that it is hard, but it's also true that if we take small steps at the beginning, we can maximize the likelihood of success.
Very good. Yeah.
Susie, what's your thoughts on the difficultness question? Are you talking about driving a process of culture change, but in a way you're trying to do it in competition with lots of other forces trying to shift culture in almost opposite directions?
Okay, so make it easy
Yep.
and involve wine. Okay, so I think that what I'm trying to say is that I think I come from an industry which is all about quick fix, lose weight in 30 seconds, change your life in 21 days. So it doesn't work. We found that out. It doesn't work. So what does work? So how do we create changes? So make it easy, make it enjoyable, make it fun, give it a structure. One of the things I'm absolutely passionate about is about creating architecture of habits, an architecture of happiness habits. So, for example, with the happiness clubs, you're booking, you've got one session a month, you're going, you're meeting your friends, you're having a glass of wine, you're talking about how to be more resilient that month, you're connecting, you're sharing, it's wonderful, and then you're making a commitment. And at the beginning, we were making these gigantic commitments that we were going to start charities, all sorts. Didn't work. It was things like, the things that have made the most difference have been things like letting the traffic in. On my commute to work, 45 minutes, I used to arrive to work like that, and now I'm zen, because I'm letting the traffic in. So it's small things that make a difference, but also in the context of you're meeting your friends, you're looking forward to it. It's not something that's hard, and then from then it will build. From there it will grow. So let's set ourselves up to succeed with this rather than fail.
And if you are stuck in a traffic jam, just meditate.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Or let somebody else in. It makes you feel
Yeah.
good. It's altruism. You make them feel good, but it makes you feel good.
Anthony, what's difficult and what's not difficult about this in a school setting?
Okay, it's fear and ignorance. I'm going to stand up. Not that I think it makes very much difference to my height, right? But it just chanced to have a stretch. I was just thinking about that. Yesterday, coming away from this lunch with Richard Layard, we were coming out, and person after person didn't let us out. And I was watching their knuckles on their steering wheels, and they were kind of white, like that. Not that I was making any judgments. Okay, so why can't schools be these really wonderful places full of beauty and curiosity? And it is those two reasons. Ignorance simply because the schools think that you've just got to have all this, which is rigor, discipline, structure, lack of yielding, and they don't recognize that you also need love and gentleness and curiosity and acceptance. And for a really great school, like a really great family, if you have too much of this, you can get lost. And if you have too much of that, then you have schools like our schools the world over, which are rather soulless, dull, fear-driven places. So ignorance is one, and fear is the other. And fear permeates schools everywhere. The teacher is afraid of the parents. The children are afraid of the parents and the teacher. The teacher's afraid that the head of department won't think well of them if they don't get the grades. The head of department is afraid of the head of faculty. The head of faculty is afraid of the head. The head's afraid of the governors. The head and governors are afraid of the local authority if their grades aren't going up in the league tables. The local authority is afraid of the Department for Education and afraid of the Secretary of State for Education. He or she are afraid of the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is afraid of their mother. Mum! And there's this terrible thing in education called PISA. What's PISA? Actually, I don't know what PISA stands for, but it's something like Performance International Schools Assessment or something. They can't even spell it properly. PISA. So I always think of it as like a tower, which are just waiting to fall over. And you know, governments around the world, heads of schools around the world are petrified they're going to go down in this assessment for maths and literacy and science. And what we need to do is replace the fear on which schools, in my absolute experience, run predominantly. They're predominantly fear-driven places. And then in this country we have Ofsted. You know, Ofsted is just full of very loving people, actually. I think you go into Ofsted because you are a deeply compassionate, loving person. Otherwise, why would you go into Ofsted? And so that's another fear element. What we need to do is replace fear by love and actually have this wonderful word of trust. Radical idea again. Why don't we trust teachers just to get on and teach what's brought them into the profession?
The loving Ofsted is a wonderful idea. I can't quite get my head around it, though. But intriguingly, Anthony mentioned PISA, which, as you say, has been the system of measuring particularly maths and science all over the world. The next generation of PISA, which they launched the sort of first version of this year, will be measuring collaborative creativity. Yeah. No one's actually told the Department of Education here yet that this is what there will be league tables of in 5 years' time, but it's a very intriguing shift, even from these slightly factory, grindish bits of the system. I want to ask you, Mattia, about refugees, because this is, I'm sure, a very great concern for everyone in this room. How do we respond? How do we show compassion and altruism? And how do we get over all the barriers, all the difficultness, all the fear people have of actually too much generosity? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, you know, I was quite sad. I read in a French weekly someone saying that Angela Merkel is going to break Europe by taking so many refugees. So I thought, if they can't rejoice, you know, at least don't criticize someone who's trying to do something. And also, I've been struck by, you know, the fact that 10,000 years ago, there was no boundaries. You know, how can you draw a sort of abstract line in somewhere in the middle of nature and saying, beyond this line, you can't go? What does that mean for human beings who are trying to escape from places where they have no food, or they can't have security for their children, and they're ready to risk their own life, and how many of them have already lost it? So, I mean, this really, and then we are in affluent country, and we know that one of the issues selfish economy can never solve is poverty in the midst of plenty. So this idea that we can't share anything, we cannot, you know, depart of a little bit of our superfluous luxuries, you know, so that's something that's really heartrending. But at the same time, we see the incredible solidarity of people, what we call the banality of goodness, that how many citizens themselves are ready to do something when the occasion comes, and those are not just abstract figures, but real human beings that come with their children, with their wife, with their parents. And so I think that's at the same time encouraging and discouraging. So, but again, as John said, you know, if you look at the prospects, especially with climate change, you know, here at the London School of Economics, Lord Nicholas Stern said that maybe we'll get 200 million climate refugees. with half of Bangladesh trying to go to Bengal in India, what's going to happen? So unless we remedy to the problem, not only, of course, in their own country to provide better education, opportunity for society to open up, better status for women, and so forth, and then take care of the global issue that affects absolutely everyone, then this is just, unfortunately, even how terribly tragic it is now, it is just a little bit of what might happen. So when people say, well, human beings can adapt, at what cost? How much suffering? So that's why we should do something now, but also think of the midterm and the long term. And that's where, again and again, we need more commitment, altruism, and care. And you said about difficulty, I was thinking of a classical Buddhist text that said there is no big, difficult task that cannot be broken into small, easy tasks, step by step, with a sense of direction. And in a sense, there's a joy in going in the right direction to better serve others, to do accomplish something. Even if it's difficult, that's not the problem. Difficult means what? If you feel as a great joy, like you walk in the mountains up and down because you have somewhere worth to go, then even it needs a lot of effort, and it's not always fun. People are looking too much for entertainment. But the effort is joyous because it's virtuous and it's meant to bring some better solution. Then why should we shy about being effortful?
So a very common theme there about not being being afraid of the sheer scale of big problems like climate change, break things down into manageable steps. I want to ask you to give very quick answers to one question before I open up to the audience, and that's about discipline, which is actually not a word I think any of you have used. How much is what we're talking about essentially about learning the habits of a discipline? Richard first, just very, very briefly.
I think discipline is really part of what we're talking about. The circuits in the brain that are being strengthened by these practices are circuits that actually do play a role in, I think, what we call discipline. In His Holiness's writings on secular ethics, one particular construct that he talks about is the ethics of restraint. And that is really fundamentally about a certain kind of discipline that can be learned and cultivated. And if we engage in certain kinds of simple training of the mind, we can learn that kind of discipline. So I think that discipline is relevant and plays some role.
Susie?
So for me, again, it's that piece around habits and how important they are. There's a lot of research out there about foundational habits by creating, if we can just create those as the basic sleep, meditation, eating well, then it's much easier to make changes, save the world, do whatever we need to do. But if we let's build the foundations first of all, and it's incredibly important. And that it does take effort, but you can create that foundation very quickly, I think. But 12 weeks.
So as a headmaster, you're an expert in discipline, aren't you, Anthony?
Yeah. Yeah, that's why I went in to schools, because I wanted to beat people and to punish them. It's unbelievable fun. You can't go home tonight, or you just can't go home at Christmas. It might not make them happy, but it makes me very happy. And no, seriously, it is about self-discipline rather than other discipline. And I think that's really important. The kind of discipline that we need to develop in our young people and in ourselves is where we have the discipline because we want to do it. And I think myself, if you're going to make progress in life in anything, whether it's sport or the arts or learning, you need to have a discipline, but it needs to come from within, and then it's strong. Mindfulness in schools talk about strong silence and weak silence, and a weak silence is where the teacher says, "Shut up, everybody, and just be quiet!" Now, you're all very quiet now. And that's a weak silence, but a strong silence is where people are voluntarily are doing it. So, yes, discipline fundamental, but it needs to be inward rather than imposed from outside.
Matthew?
Once I heard His Holiness saying about someone who was really in hurry, sort of, to progress on the path. And he said, well, you know, one thing about sometimes some of you Westerners is you want enlightenment to be fast, to be easy, and if possible, cheap.
With wine.
And by cheap, he meant, you know, effortless. You know, just burn an incense stick and relax, and some soft music. And you know, how can it work? You know, if someone comes, you say, you know, I'm going to run a marathon or become a piano virtuoso or a chess master, but I don't want to make any effort. You say, oh, nice. Great, you know, wish you good success. So, but again, you know, there are some words that people don't like. We say in Tibetan, it's like eating a donkey on the nose with a stick. Renunciation, terrible, you know. But if you renounce to be addicted to the cause of suffering, what's the problem? Is a bird renouncing to its cage when he flies out? Discipline, if it's a joyful effort, the best thing you can do in life, to use every moment that passes by to something constructive that brings happiness of others and yourself, what's the problem? So I don't see the point of seeing discipline or continuous effort towards something that is worthy, that every moment makes sense. It's like gold, flowing gold instead of being this kind of hectic sort of passage of time. So I think discipline is a beautiful thing when it's seen as using every moment of your life in a sort of very meaningful way for others and yourself.
Okay, I'd like to bring in some thoughts, some questions, some comments from all of you. If the house lights could come up a little bit so I can actually see. There are mics there. There's someone in the middle of the stalls just here. So we get a mic to you first, halfway down the first hall, and then I'll take one person up there. There's two people at the back there. If you get a mic ready for them in the Royal, towards the right. But here's your mic. And the floor is yours.
Hello, hi. My name is Jo, and I just wanted to say thank you so much to all of you for your talks, which I've really enjoyed. I have an observation and something I wanted to share briefly. So my observation was actually about your question about things being hard, because I think my feeling about this as someone who has meditated for a long time on and off, have an irregular practice, is that if I tell myself that something is going to be hard, then it will be. It's like saying don't think of an elephant, really. So I would like to suggest that just if it being in the moment, meditating is about now, this particular moment, if I carry on thinking about that then and focusing on that, then that gets rid of that thought. And the thing I wanted to share is that this idea of fear, and a few months ago I organised an event for my profession, I'm a lawyer, about meditation and ethics from a Buddhist perspective in London, and I was terrified because I thought it would be career suicide, which it may yet be, but anyway. The point is that we got an incredible response. We had 60 people come, and what has come out of that is that hopefully in the next month or so, we will be having mindfulness sessions in one of the Inns of Court weekly. And so I was... And I was really terrified about this event, and I still am, but I wanted to share it with all of you because I thought you'd kind of get it. But I think being brave enough to create what we want bears fruit. Thanks.
So bringing wisdom into courts, that's a pretty radical idea. And any comments, Matthew, would you like to say one thing?
Just do caring mindfulness. Please don't forget those 6 letters.
Yeah.
That will take care of a lot of good things.
Yeah. Let's take the 2 up there. If you got the mic there 4 rows from the back. It's just coming to you now. We need the mic up. That's in the Royal.
Go on.
Yeah.
When I was a boy, I was a geeky kid, and therefore it seemed that I should be an academic. And when I was in my mid-20s, I decided, and I was doing my PhD, that really being a professor wasn't for me. And I now know that that would have been my adaptive self. In fact, I changed, and I've worked with people for all of my career, and I've been extremely happy. And I think that's because that's my authentic self. And I wanted any comments on what helps people to find out what is their authentic self, because I think the education system trains them to be their adaptive self.
Okay.
Well, here I am now in my 20s too, and I still feel quite geeky. In fact, I came of age in here because it's the first time I've been back to the Lyceum since I came to an all-night concert from boarding school, and we had The Crazy World of Arthur Brown, and some of you may remember, and that changed my life. They were appalling. But you know, the point about education is there is no stillness in it. The question should be, for all of us involved in education, what does this child love? What are they really good at? The question for parents, too, who for the best reasons in the world often have such hopes and aspirations for their children, which are different to what that child themselves might want. There's that wonderful saying from Gibran about your children are not your children. And that applies to schools too. They are themselves. And the great teachers are the ones that let the child blossom into that authentic self. And the great schools are the ones that give the space and the stillness in which that naturalness can blossom. Because without stillness, there can be no authenticity and no truth. There can merely be imposition.
And so now we know how you avoided a career as a rock star, which was, would have been an interesting
Yeah, I'm still hoping.
turn.
You know, I haven't given up hope.
Could still start. Is there anyone at the very top in the grand who would like to make a comment or ask a question? Yes, I can see someone about 6 rows down on the left, and a microphone is coming very rapidly down towards you.
Good evening. A question primarily directed at Richard, but maybe Anthony could comment as well. Discussing the role of attention. Nowadays we've got technology, which is a fantastic tool, and social media, but it tends to spread the attention rather than to concentrate it. And just wondered if you could comment on the effect that has on the brain and also with children in education.
How do we avoid monkey mind?
Yeah, I'd be happy to comment. First of all, there are, as your question implies, there are actually good data to show that there are cohort effects on attention, meaning that the attention of the average adult today is worse than it was in 1950, and we don't know exactly what the cause of that is, but certainly the increased rate at which we are exposed to information, the prevalence of digital devices is likely a contributor, but it's also likely not the only contributor. There are others as well, including causes as far-fetched as the increase in environmental pollutants, which have deleterious effects on the brain. So it's really complicated and it's multifactorial. But I also want to underscore the fact that I don't think that the smartphones that we have in our pocket should be regarded as the enemy. I think what is the problem is our relationship to them. And in fact, we have recently, with help from the Gates Foundation, we've been developing video games for kids that are designed, in one case, games to cultivate mindful attention, caring mindfulness, and in another case, explicitly to cultivate empathy and pro-social behavior. And it is possible, I believe, to actually design games that kids will enjoy playing that do not involve shooting other people. And so I think we can take advantage of the technology in certain cases and actually use it for the greater good. This will require industry coming on board. It's going to require a lot of things aligning, but I think we're beginning to see a shift in our culture in this way. And I think that some of the simple methods that have been discussed over the course of this afternoon can help us to change our relationship with the digital devices that we carry. We're not going to get rid of them. So instead of trying to beat them, which I think is an exercise in futility, we can work on changing our relationship with them. I think,
So one of the very welcome things about this audience is we don't have that sort of pale blue glow at every seat of people multitasking. Instead, you are, I think, focused and attentive to what these people are saying. But I'd like to ask Richard very quickly, would you encourage people to deliberately switch things off for long periods every day or every week?
Yeah, if it takes physically switching it off for you not to take it out every 2 minutes to check your email, then it would be, I think, useful to switch it off. Absolutely. And the idea of multitasking, folks, is a complete and utter myth. Doesn't exist. Multitasking does not exist. What exists is rapid shifts among different tasks, which leads to a deterioration in our ability to perform those tasks. But we're not actually multitasking. We are simply rapidly shifting our attention, and in most cases, it is toxic.
That's you.
Yes, well, about video games, there's one that will be called the Great Hospital, where we will treat all the people wounded in other video games.
Good idea.
And
All right, there's a question, 2 questions right at the back here. Could you take a mic to the very back row of the stalls? That'll be after. There'll be I'm not sure who's doing it, but there'll be sure it'll be on offer. Right at the very back. The very, very back of the stalls. There's a forest of hands going up, so pick whoever is smiling most.
Happiest.
Hi, I'm actually a teacher myself, and I so agree with Dr. Selden, what he's been saying. I think so often in modern teaching, children are not allowed to live in the present. They're trapped in a fearful past and a fear of the future. Our grade system has forced them to live in a sort of a microcosm of fear, in a sense, which I think is so damaging at so many levels. I also think another problem that we need to address as a society, not just with teaching either, but the reliance we seem to have on Messrs. Tick, box, and mismanagement. There don't seem to be any tick boxes in teaching anyway for things like inspiring and kind and honest and good.
Okay, are there any hands in the very top? Yes, at the very, very back. Please do ask.
So thank you very much to our speakers. It's been fantastic. And something that I'll be taking away from today and feeling extremely inspired by is the fact that we can do so much within our own minds to influence our happiness and our well-being. But something that's also quite striking for me is the fact that we only have control as individuals over so much. And so in the work that I do in my profession at the New Economics Foundation, we do a lot to try and encourage policymakers to think more about well-being and happiness and make decisions with compassion and altruism in mind. But I would love to hear from the panel any thoughts they have about how we can do that most effectively.
Susan?
I think it comes down again to the idea of it starts with the individual. So I've been invited to the Parliament in a couple of weeks. They're doing a big mindfulness with the members of Parliament there. So the more enlightened our MPs can be, you know, it'll start with one person. It starts with the individual, and then it goes out. And then those two individuals can come together and collaborate. So I think it's how do we influence the individuals? How do we, and the corporations or parliaments, how do we do that? But again, I think it definitely goes back to the individual.
And there is an all-party parliamentary group on mindfulness
Yes,
whose
that's it,
report
sorry,
is coming
yes.
out in 2 weeks' time,
2
I
weeks'
think.
time, yeah.
Which is fairly remarkable. You sort of pinch yourself when you hear about that. I think someone's got a mic there at the back of the stalls. Would you like to stand up and ask your question? You've been very patient, evidently.
Yes, hello. My name is Lizzie, and I'm a meditation teacher and hypnotherapist. And perhaps my question's to Matthew. I'm wondering how you convey altruism to people who are very aggressive and angry. Because sometimes you can be very kind to people, but they just don't want to accept that kindness.
You mean that they can't accept someone being kind to them?
Yes, when you're trying to be kind to somebody who's perhaps angry or they don't want to take that kindness.
Well, I guess maybe in the beginning, if you are anyway, this question often comes when you are confronted with difficult people. What is the best attitude? Okay, confrontation. So, you know, in the best case, of course, if you just sort of pour of them, or they are so angry, and you sort of, you know, say, I love you, and all these things. It's too fast, too much. So they will think that you are just, you know teasing them or whatever. But if you are, you know, not pretend that you are kind, but you really somehow don't depart from the inner benevolence. You don't sort of pretend to be kind while just being, you know, teeming with resentment that you try not to express. Because that's just automatically felt with macro expression, and you won't be able to maintain that long. But if genuinely, not just in one time, but over, you know, a period of encounters, you maintain that benevolence and openness, nothing to lose, nothing to gain, everything to offer and share. So in the best case, it will disarm that people's aggressivity. Even if it doesn't work, at least you didn't fall in the same trap, so you at least maintain your inner peace. And we did, you know, with our friend Paul Ekman, confrontation studies. You know, they wanted, you know, I was one of those usual guinea pigs, as I often happened to me. And they wanted, first they teamed me with a wonderful Nobel Prize of Physics, and we're supposed to have controversial issues. You know, something like why, you know, a cell geneticist should become a Buddhist monk, so crazy, you know, go to the Himalayas and believe in reincarnation and terrible stuff like that. But we had a wonderful conversation about the nature of consciousness and things like that, and all our measure our physical parameters, you know, the sweat and the breathing and filming all our macro expression. It was a delightful conversation. Then they said, now you are going to be paired with the most difficult person in the campus of Berkeley. It was number 2, in fact, because the most difficult one didn't want to come. Anyway, so the second most difficult person came, and I said, you know, we are supposed to have a confrontation. He says, no problem with me. So we went on, and they were measuring all our things, and Paul Ekman was looking at all the facial expression, the 47 muscles of the face and everything. And then, of course, in the beginning, that person was very much aroused, you know, he went straight on me, and I sort of, you know, tried to explain and sort of be okay. And after, you know, as time went by, you know, you could see they could see his physiology going like do. At the end, he said, I can't fight with this guy, you know. He smiles all the time and he says, you know, things that make sense. There's something about him I can't fight. So I think you need two hands to clap. One hand you can clap a little bit, but it doesn't make much noise. So basically, maintain your inner strength of kindness, and that's the best possible answer in any case.
We have time for just one last question, which will be in the by popular acclaim in the Royal, before I ask each of our speakers for a final comment. Have you got your mic?
Yes, thank you. I feel very grateful, very supported. Thank you. So I'm now using my smartphone in what I hope is a good, supportive way of my attention. So my question pertains to collective action problems, and it's a question I think maybe one of you would feel called to answer, but it's really a question to all of us sitting in this room here today. So collective action is, I think, hugely important, and we've talked about fear blocking change. And I feel that very often people don't act because they're afraid that they won't make a difference, or if they act alone, or maybe with a few people, or maybe even with 100 or 150 people. You know, what does it matter on the scale of all of humanity? And so my question is this, because I believe that we can really coordinate our behavior in this day and age. So let's just imagine this, and I don't even think this is an exaggeration. This could happen quite easily. If you imagine 10 million people coordinating to collectively perform a single act to make life better, what do you see? What do you feel? That's it.
Well, thank you for that. I think that's a great question to end this session on. And I might ask each of you to share some thoughts on how does the personal and the collective, the micro and the macro, connect up? Richard.
Well, it is a wonderful question and invitation, and going back to the 4 constituents of well-being that I began with, generosity is something that is so accessible to us. His Holiness referred to some scientific research that suggests that innate basic goodness is a fact. That is, we all come into the world with an innate capacity to respond positively in an inviting way to warm-hearted and altruistic encounters. And it doesn't take much to express kindness and generosity to those beings immediately in our surroundings, and the response that it evokes in others, which is a natural biological response, is so inviting and reinforcing, and it's a kind of positive double whammy because it helps the others and it benefits ourselves. And so the invitation is we can try that on a small scale among those in our immediate circles, and we can proliferate those circles, as Albert Einstein once said, to widen our circles of compassion, to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. Thank you.
I'd like to go back to something the speaker down here talked about, and I think you talked about being brave and having courage, and I was talking to someone else back here around vulnerability. I think a lot of this work is about being brave enough to say, I am going to make a difference, no matter what the response is, and having that courage. And then doing creative collaboration around that. So it's all right, me, I'll do it. And then you'll find that people will come. They will start to collaborate with you. And then all of a sudden, it builds. And all of a sudden, there's 2,000 people doing great things. So be brave. Take one action. And one action for happiness, I would say.
So I spoke about fear, and I just wanted to finish on talking about judgment. And so much of school and so much of life is based upon judgment and good and bad, and it's all about separation and division. And one thing that I've particularly been moved by in schools is the child who, partly maybe because I was disruptive and alienated when I was at school, but I've always felt very, very drawn to the child who finds it difficult to fit in, who is hurt and angry and maybe disruptive. And you give the most disruptive person in the class or the school something to do, which may be to look after a child who's very upset. And that person who has been trying to destroy will be moved to love and suddenly have a role and suddenly feel accepted. And I can just see how judgment leads to alienation and non-judgment leads to acceptance, and that then builds communities. And I just think that for me a great takeaway about social action on the whole of today is that sense that we just have to stand together, because in truth we are not separate. We just think we are at times.
About the way to extend the circle. I remember His Holiness saying to someone, well, you start that sort of loving kindness within your family, of course, with those who are near to you. Otherwise, if you just think, I love all human beings except those few nasty ones around me. So really genuinely start and then extend to the community, and then to the village, and then to all sentient beings that not abstract entities, but they do exist with a life, with hopes and fears. And so that's how you can make the articulation between individual change and societal change and cultural change. And also, we should not underestimate the power of ideas to change. 10 people in 80 or something decided here that we should abolish slavery. Everybody laughed. In the parliament, they say, the British Empire will collapse economically, but 10 years later it was abolished. 10 people decided we should have a universal declaration of human rights, and a few years later it was done. So at some point when a powerful idea comes and a certain number of people have a critical mass, you don't need 90%, 10, 20% of a powerful idea might create a tipping point in cultures. So I think that's what we should work with determination, not think that because we are just one, nothing can be done and only institution can change. When we reach this critical mass and then we mutually fashion culture with individuals, then this real change can happen, yes.
In a moment, Mathieu will lead us in a meditation. I just wanted to make one final comment before he does. We've heard some quite extraordinary ideas this afternoon. Apparently the United Nations is going to move to Moscow. Ofsted is going to be relaunched as a sort of an agent of love. But there's really just one very simple idea behind all of these conversations, which is, I think, summed up in the title, Action for Happiness, that we actually have the ability to act first on what happens in our own brains, which are maybe more plastic than we realize, through cultivation of habit, that we have the power to act in our daily lives, at work, at school, and so on. And we have an obligation to act in the wider society, the wider world we're part of. And I think in answer to the final question, you see 10 million people taking part in collective acts of compassion almost every time there's a big disaster. That brings out extraordinary responses, as Syria has done, as Nepal did, the Philippines. And as His Holiness said, we are social animals. We respond that way because it's in our nature. And for me, that's the most important really message of today, that all of these things are not about trying to become something we're not. They're really just about remembering what we truly are. Thank you.